Ikaw na
Okay, magandang umaga ulit sa ating lahat. Nasa pang-inang kwento na tayo, pangalawang araw. Gusto ko ipakilala sa inyo ang ating manunulat ngayong oras na ito, si Andrew Estacio, and I'll let him say something about himself and his writing. First.
Magandang araw po sa inyo lahat. Ako si Andrew, first timer lang din sa workshop na ganito. Sobrang first time, actually first workshop ko sa buong buhay ko. And then, nag-a-adjust pa ako. So maraming salamat po. Ayan. So ito po yung backgrounder na hinabilin sa akin, sir. Ang pagsusulat ay naglungan ng aking mga baliw na imahinasyon. Dito ako nakakahanap ng tahanan. Dito ako nakakahanap din ng personal na kalayaan. Bata pa lamang may kawilihan na ako sa pag-iimbento ng mga mundong kakanlok sa aking pagkatao. Lumaki akong dikit sa relihiyon ng Katolisismo, mapapamilya at paaralan. Kaya't ang paniniwala pa rin parati sa aking kasarian bilang bakla isang kasalanan. Naalala ko sa radyo ng El Shaddai, lagi nilang pinapatotoo sa kanilang testimonya. Salamat sa Diyos, lalaki ng anak kong bakla. Binago na siya ni Yahweh. O minsan narinig ko, may komentaryo sa radyo nila, mga bakla, AIDS carrier yan, laging nagda-drugs yung mga yan. Sodom at Gomora, nasa Bible ng bla 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 bla. Ulol, sabi kong palihim. Relihiyon ko rin naman nagturo sa aking mawili sa maupuli na sining pagsamba. Noong bata ako, nagdedesenyo na ako ng damit ni Mama Mary, gumagawa ng sariling altar, sumasali ng posisyon, higit ngayon may soft spot pa rin natitira sa aking pagkatao. Pagtanday natagpuan ko ang mundo ng fiksyon. Sa personal, matagal kong iniwan pansamantala ang LGBTQ writing, pati na rin ang literary criticism. Ngayon naghahanap pa rin ako ng espasyo. Unti-unti nag-aalam mo yung damdamin ko sa ngayon. Sana matulungan ako ng workshop na ito. Salamat po.
Thanks. Ngayon, actually, I was tasked by the director, Rolando Tolentino, na kung pwede daw magbigay ng kaunting craft talk. Ayan. So, craft talk, definitely not. No, hindi. I will not dare. No? But I guess magiging interesting for everyone na ma-share ko lang kung ano yung mga yung naalala niyo yung first day, I think, when I talked about kung anong panahon ako nagsimula magsulat. At ano yung mga influences din na masasabi kong gay writing na sinuong ko. At malaking tulong dito, hindi, isang proposal sa isang MA class ko, na-realize mo meron pala akong ganyan. At malaking tulong ang mga paper ni Neil. So, I'd like to talk a bit about yung representasyon ng bakla sa maikling kwento. No, na siyempre galing din sa maikli at maliit na karanasan na mayroon ako. No? So yung una dito ay yung nanggagaling ako noon, galing ang mga panulat na nakamulatan ko. 1980s ito mga Larry. Yung dualismo nga ng kabaklaan, no? Sa panitikan, maikling kwento, at actually noon may ilan ng mga gay stories na inilalabas sa ibang genre, like, lalo na sa pelikula. No? So, ano tong dualismo ng kabaklaan? Ito yung straight acting, closeted, at saka yung effeminist, yung favorite character. No? So, ito yung nakagisnan ko ng mga mga karakterisasyon o representasyon ng bakla sa mga nababasa kong akda. No? Hindi ko rin sure, kasi tinatanong ko nga itong mga writers natin dito, kailan ba kayo pinanganak? Oh, 1991? Hindi pa sila pinapanganak, nagsusulat na ako ng kabaklaan. No, so, hindi ko alam kung matatandaan ninyo or familiar kayo sa mga salitang silahis. No, so, bukod sa bakla, meron silahis. Tapos, naging very common and very popular yung balak. No? Natingin ko yung mga pamamaraan din ng pagkatawagan na parang hindi masyadong confrontational yung pagtawag sa iyo ng bakla. No? So ano yung straight, alam naman natin ano yung straight acting at saka yung pamin o yung effeminate o yung pag-girl. No? Nabanggit ko at dito din, pinatampok ito ng mga characters ni kung pamilya kayo sa Roda, no? Si Roderick Paulate. No? Yan, napakapalasak ng kanyang mga karakterisasyon, baklang loud, no? The screaming fagot type of character. No? Ngunit, I'm sure yung mga nag-aaral ng kabaklaan sa Pilipinas, no? Nakita din yung, kasi namulat din naman ako doon sa mga pelikula o mga representasyon na bagamat nandun sa molde ng screaming fagot, nandun din yung lalim, no? Like yung may mga pelikula nung sila Ronaldo Valdez at saka si Dito Fernando, yung si Malakas, si Maganda, si Mahinhin. Doon ako una nakapanood na isang lesbian character played by Elizabeth Oropesa. No? At dito, ganun pa rin ang molde, stereotypical, pero pakiramdam ko nung napapanood ko ito at minsan may mga reruns ito, no? Nandun na yung mas kino-complicate na yung character. No? Nag-iisip na, meron ng problema panlipunan, meron ng problema pang-ekonomiya. No? Hindi na lang ito yung tungkol dun sa another stereotypical representation ng bakla is yung the economic money for sex relations. No? Ganun yung mga nakamulatan ko nung mga panahon na ito. And then, sa pag-aaral na ni Neil, no? Makikita din niya itong straight acting and effeminate character doon sa mga early gay writers, tinawagin din yung early gay writers na sila Severino Montano, Orlando Nagres, at Tony Perez. Si Tony Perez yung inabot ko. Nag-abot kami halos. Wala si Roland kasi nung nagkata ako 1988, Diyos ko, historicizing talaga ito. Pinupush ako ng grupo na makipag-unahan kay Tony Perez kasi we heard to the grapevine na Tony Perez was about to, yung Camacho na, yung Cacho, at sabi sa akin ng kata, bilisan mo na para maunahan na. Parang ganyan. Sa loob-loob na, hindi pa nakikipag-unahan. Pero nag-try pa rin ako.
1980 na sulat yun. Kausap ko si Roger Sikat. In-enter ni Tony Perez sa Palanca for the novel. Hindi nanalo, pero gusto nito ni Roger. Kasi raw yung mga co-judges daw ng mga homophobic. So siya lang nag-push.
And I hope I'm able to quote Neil correctly, no? Kasi siyempre, yung isa muna, yung kay Orlando Nagres, yung hanggang dito na lamang, maraming salamat. Ito na nga yung tingin ko, at ito pinabasa talaga sa akin ng guru ko sa MA, na kailangan mabasa mo kasi panandang ba ito yan, yung kay Orlando Nagres, yung hanggang dito na lamang, maraming salamat. Kasi dito na nga yung pagtalakay dun sa hirap at pasakit ng paglaladlad, no, or coming out. No? On the other hand, tatawagin naman ni Neil na homophobic ang Cubao 1980 ni Tony Perez dahil stereotypical representation at denigration ng mga bakla. Yun yung basa.
Sinuwi ko at the end.
Yeah.
Pero ano kasi siya parang, has anyone read that novel? About 1980? So it's quite troubling because the main character is not gay. He is in fact, he's a call boy who's a teenage prostitute who goes through one night marriage encounter with gay men after another. So it's basically a series of really dehumanizing sexual encounters as a prostitute, di ba? And in the end, he becomes born again. Because he ends up going to a Araneta Center where there's a fellowship going on. And then he goes to the very top of the dome and says, "Kukunin niyo mga bakla kayo." Yung iba pa rin yung novel. Tapos, yung kanyang best friend na called boy there gets killed by an obsessed bakla lover.
But you even question Di ba?
No, okay.
Where's the gayness?
No, okay. So that seems to, it's clearly a very troubled first shout of gay liberation. My God, it's like, what kind of shout is that? Okay, yun na, bakla kayo, yun yung shout niya. Pero, the depiction of gay sex, so it's really, I think, a double-handed or kind of underhanded, very, very sort of clever first attempt, no? A fictional sort of attempt to talk about gay desire. Because while that is the context of it, that's the picture of the novel, the chapters where gay sex is depicted arousing. Yeah. So, parang you're torn between hating the novel for being so full of self-hate, but on the other hand, my God, it's the first time you actually read a novel written in sort of like very good Filipino, very literary novel, that you get an erection while reading it. Diba? So it was really, for me, quite an interesting experience. So you cannot entirely dismiss it, but you cannot embrace it either. So it's in that space in between. It was the necessary compromise. The only way for someone like Tony Perez, who's apparently very hung up and sort of repressed, to be able to do this is to do it through this moralizing picture, but at least within that picture, you get erections.
Marami talaga coming out stories. Doon ang karamihan naman mga coming out stories tinatalakay. At ang paglalaglag bilang celebration at pagtanggap sa sexualidad. I think that's part of the advocacy din ng gay writing. No? Paano mo ipapatanggap yung ganito. Una, mga akda, at saka yung advocacy mo ng pagiging isang bakla. Yun yung gusto kong parang tungtungan din natin sana kung paano basahin din itong susunod.
Ano na sabi ng yun?
Sabihin mo ba
Yung awards, yung stylistic choice lang ng pag-paragraph. Kasi di ba may part na pinili niya yung maingay na paragraph na nagigets kung bakit. Kasi nasa labas sila nung tawag nun munisipyo. Tapos maingay, magulo, tapos nagkahalo-halo yung mga usapan nila. Pero nung pumasok mo sila ng munisipyo, parang hindi na siya necessary. Pwede ka na mag-enter, tapos sabihin mo kung sino yun. Tapos, I guess dito, may lang naman yung pangungusap, kaya hindi siguro ma-practice. Pero pag ganong magulo yung paragraph, kailangan mag-practice ng polyphony na dapat distinct yung voices ng mga characters. Kasi magkakasama na nga sila, magkakatunog pa sila. So, hindi sila individual characters at that point. Pero hindi sinabi ko. Pero pwede sinabi.
Adrian, actually, na-appreciate ko yung unang kwento dahil para sa yung basa ko sa kanya is fantasy. Hindi man fantasy, pero it's an aspirational of LGBT unity. Kaya yung pinoint na craft issues ni Cupcake, I didn't mind it as much. Na yung mga ibang, kunwari yung dialogue na naging reported speech, na naging kasama na ng narrative, at yung pagiging the way that the characters might sound the same, I didn't mind it as much. Kasi nga, it was the LGBT, well, how I read it was the LGBT community coming together to first fight for themselves with the government and then fight against the church. So, in that way, hindi siya masyadong naging, na-appreciate ko siya actually because ganun nga yung naging pagbasa ko. Sa pangalawa naman, kasi medyo pareho din yung style na ginawa. I think doon, mas pumapasok na pwedeng mag-break yung mga paragraphs. Kasi nakikita natin yung internal life ni Marilik. And because it's big chunks of paragraphs, medyo mahirap siyang i-access. But I like that it was a depiction of a bakla. who had a very rich interior life and who was very artistic. Though gusto nga din sabi nga ni DJ, mapush pa yung artistic side na yun. And the fact that in both stories, it's a way to talk about the LGBT Filipino relationship with the church, which is intrinsic din kasi with a lot of the LGBT experience here in the Philippines because we are predominantly Roman Catholic. Okay.
Pikatin ko lang mabilis yung tungkol dun sa pag-break, and I'd like to point out nga din yung supportan yung comment ni Cupcake, yung tungkol sa pagiging distinct nung characters mo, Kasi may ganun ding effect sa akin na nakakalito. Sino na nga ba ang nagsasalita ng ano? Ngayon, pero mamaya natin tanungin ng author. Ang tanong ko sa kanya, coming from your observations, like, is this a matter of style? Meron ka bang gustong palitawin sa ganitong klase ng pagsasama-sama ng mga nagsasalita? O nakatamaran mo lang na mag-break?
Enter lang.
Enter lang naman. Kasi nung panahon namin, makinilya pa talaga nakakatamad din. Pero, very yun. Usapin talaga yun ng technical. Na kailangan maging malinaw, lalo na naman napakarami itong binilang ko So, from Ate Minerva to Tivoli to ang dami-dami nila nagsasalita. So, mamaya, sagutin natin. Pasagutin natin. And, sige, next. Yes.
Gusto ko na mag-comment sa kanonisasyon ng Santa Santino. Kasi I thought na parang energetic siya. And ang promising kung the kind of story it's telling. Kasi one, it's from the province. And two, it's not the Western conception of LGBT, but of divorce. I mean, it's incorporated, pero it's also recognizing what the idea of bakla, the idea of divorce. Pero yun yan, like I said, promising yung beginning, pero nagkaroon ng turning point for me where I couldn't believe the story anymore. Nung panahon, nung time na pumunta na sila nung inambush nila yung procession. And yung parang in-address na yung crowd. Tapos, parang ang generic ng characterization ng crowd and sobrang convenient na
yung point na parang alam mo over the back na sitcoms here, hindi mo na siyang feel our skip at that point.
kasi nung una, parang believable siya. Tapos, it's funny, it's entertaining, pero nag-leap yung humor from that funny to something ridiculous and illogical na, or non-realistic, in that it's not, I'm not saying na it's not realistic na they're supportive, but it's convenient for the plot to progress in that they're all very supportive and like, etc.
Yung crowd nila, participant crowd.
Na gusto nila ng pageant, ganyan. Mention ko lang din yung how na, yung parang may speech ba na, nais ba natin ng pagbabago, parang it's a natural na in that context. Tapos, yung nung sinabing nakakakilabot, parang hindi ko na-feel yung colosality ng event. Yun, basically na-lose yung steam ng story, I think, halfway through, kasi it went too much their way. And, yun, hindi ko makita yung kung bakit pumayag ni Mayor na ituloy yung pageant. Yung parang convenient na lang na, tigil niya, hayaan niyo na sila.
May response doon?
Yung what Adrian and Reggie said, this story is about the LGBTQ's relationship with the church and with society. Tapos I have the same, kasi roomie kami ni Anders, we were talking about it last night. Sabi ko, at that point, I had to suspend my belief din about those particular na yun. Kasi biglang nag-speech lang si Nana, si Tita, so biglang everybody was, yay! Sabi ko, I would have swallowed it more, easier, if some members of the crowd left or booed, but some people stayed. That would have been better for me. Pero this, sabi nga ni Eden, this is an aspirational story. And we have to suspend our belief, disbelief pala, sorry, at a certain point. Because I think that's what this story is about.
Yeah, and also, he actually peppers the narrative with hyperbole. So parang he tries to prepare us for that kind of fantasy. However, he also has this tendency to caricature a lot. And he has this mannerism of always preempting us hyperbolically. And maybe that's where it falls apart also.
Tapos yung reaction ng mayor, I kind of accepted it kasi may backstory yung tatlong main characters that they've always had that kind of relationship na awayin, tapos magpapatid. So, hindi ko siya naisip na mangyayari, pero when it happens, okay, they're like back to their olden days when they were children. They're still children, pero matatanda na sila.
And remember, syempre si Mayor meron niyang agenda.
Yun.
Baka yun lang ang tanungin din natin kung meron bang backstory, okay, na-provide yun. But kung na-provide din ba yung ganong klase ng pag-iisip ng Mayor, kung bakit siya mabilis na kung sumang-ayo o nagpaubaya. Later take na natin. Si Adrian ulit ba?
I just wanted to add, actually, baliktad yung experience ko kay Reggie. Medyo nahihirapan ako sa umpisa. Kasi yung treatment ko nga siya, I was trying to read it as a short story, na realist. But at some point, I think it was nung sabi sa narration, nag-suicide yung secretary. And then dahan-dahan siyang nag-suicide afterwards. Or after that, parang, okay, I get it, gets ko na yung gusto mong sabihin ng author dito sa kwento na to. Kaya na-accept ko na, okay, fine. Hindi siya, it's really, parang fantasia nga siya eh. It's
He attempt to magpaka-Chris Martinez.
Yes, yeah.
Or paki-explain yun, magpaka-Chris Martinez. Or, hindi ba yun ang hindi ba ito yung the queer language? Hindi ba ito yun? Hindi ba ito yung baklang language na masaya at hyperbole at exag? Tanong lang sa inyo.
Isa lang naka-hamper sa akin to fully get into the narrative ay register na may problematic datedness siya sa akin. Parang may tulog siya, may release to para sa pula sa puti. Pero at the same time, nag-attempt siya nung Cuentaramas na vibe, na may parang may mga moments na parang nila. Tapos, paano ba? May nagbanggit in energetic, tapos yung kayo parang clear na dynamism. But the way, the artificiality, hindi maganda, na parang histrionic. Histrionic sa akin na siya.
Explain histrionic. Serious! Nagiging histrionic. Kasi kailangan
Dictionary, please.
Dictionary. Kailangan kasi maintindihan natin, no, yung kung hindi nakakatulong itong mga devices na to, yung gamit nyo ng wika, ano nagiging effect so that we can come up with a suggestion to the author. How do we do it?
I'm not sure, sorry. Pero I think kasi the energy is constant na as. And I don't know about the others, pero at some point nakakapagod siya. And I appreciate it. Gusto ko yung sinasabi na legitimize ang boses na ganito sa narrative. Pero at the same time, sorry, nahihirapan na pala sa reader kasi it's tiring. Na-overwhelm ako sa kabaklaan.
Observation ko lang kasi pag may mga kasama ko kaibigan na yung mga loud na yung ganito dynamics. Hindi ka maboboard sa sobrang ang fluid, ang seamless rhythm. Ang relation. artist
para...
So parang yung artifice, you put on, kaya ka nagpapa.
I think that's the term. Just to summarize, magandang point yun, no? Dun sa gamit ng language. No? Kasi andun nga yung energy and everything. No? But, you also design it as a writer, as a craft natin. Ano? Dinidesign mo din kung kailan ka madaldal, kailan ka medyo mag-mellow, yun yung point ko. So hindi pwedeng, I think, nagkaroon din ako ng ganang experience, kaya hindi ko pinili stop it. Hindi totoo, gano'n din ang pakiramdam ko A personal Tagalog, writer ako at So I also had the same experience reading it. Ay, ang ingay. Ay, ang daldal. No? And of course, dahil nga ang pinanggalingan ko ay may ganong context na balik na naman pa tayo sa ganitong pagrepresentasyon ng kabaklaan. No? So, but then again, that's me. So, tingin ko yun yung point din. Hindi sinasabing hindi mo pwedeng gawin ito, but you design it. No? Inaaral mo din yan. Kung kailan ka magiging hysterical, kailan ka magiging mellow, at meron nagsabing melody. Sino yun? Parang may melody din, no? Meron kang tinutuntun na variation ng tone. Okay. Meron pa, Neil.
Sorry, I stepped out. But I'd like to frame my comments within Andrew's own presentation. This is his first workshop. And he talked a little about his own fascination or abiding fascination with Roman Catholicism, having been, I think, more or less a practicing Catholic for a long time. But even up to now, I'm not sure. Do you still go to church? Yes. Okay, so you're a practicing Catholic. The energetic storytelling, which results in so much undiscipline, the lack of discipline, is clearly coming out of his being young. But also, I think, out of his being very angry and reactionary about his position regarding the doctrinal condemnation by official religions of homosexuality. And particularly in the first story, where there is an attempt to imagine in a non-realistic sense, di ba? Hindi naman siya realistic. A scenario that actually is a bit of a satire and a kind of an absurdist sort of carnivalesque, grotesque sort of conflation of the church with the state
and the taong bayan.
And yes, and hypocritical polite society being mocked by this LGBTQ pageant, di ba? That's actually not being allowed to happen, di ba? All of that is relatable. I mean, that comes out of wanting to take a very strong political position vis-a-vis intolerance and fundamentalism and all these awful things. Yes. What is lacking, Andrew, is a deeper understanding, I think, of the reality you're trying to condemn, but at the same time trying to celebrate. What I mean is that already, without even turning fantastical, carnivalesque, or Baktinian, or artificial, this conflation is there. You just have to almost report it loud, without exaggerating it. Andrew, you've seen the gay Santa Cruz in Marikina. Have you seen it? Have you ever been to the...
Mostly mas lubog sa
Bulacan. Nangyayari na ito. Meron na talagang Santa Cruz na mga bakla. At hindi mo kailangan i-exaggerate, hyperbolize, gawing absurd ang approach. I-report mo lang siya as it is. And it will get the message across. In other words, the perversion is inextricable from the way ordinary Filipinos, in fact, live out their faith. It is already perverse. If you go strictly by the way it's supposed to go, which is not how we actually practice it. The Santo Niño Fiesta in Tondo, Manila is a very good example. Every time I am asked about the role of so every time I go to an international conference and I present any paper on this topic, I'm always invariably asked, what about the church? Because we're a Roman Catholic country. How do you face it? How do you confront it? What's your strategy, right? And I always end up just giving them an anecdote or relating a story that I actually have experienced being myself, having grown up in Tondo when I was a child, and visiting Tondo every now and then for the fiesta. The fiesta in Tondo is on the 3rd week of January, which is the Santo Niño Fiesta for all the Philippines. So that's the same time as Sinulog, that's the same time as the Santo Niño de Pandacan. All the Santo Niños celebrate. No? That's the universal feast of the Church for the Holy Child. In Tondo, the night before the fiesta is the grand procession of the Santo Niño. The whole of Tondo, which is identified as more or less an economically depressed district of Manila, diba? They show up for that grand procession. By showing up, I mean that they actually, every barangay and every street, there are many ways to organize the long procession, which starts at 3 p.m. and ends at midnight, according to barangay, according to street, according to profession, according to barkada. They can actually apply to have a segment in the parade. They each have their dancing. Parang Sinulog nga, nagto-compete sila, di ba? Nagda-dance sila, naka-costume sila, normally just the same shirt that they're wearing. And they all have their Santo Niño float or carroza. The Santo Niño is a Barbie doll. Yes. The bomberos, because they have their own segment in the parade, have a mini fire truck carroza full of Santo Niños wearing fireman's outfit with hoses. Ay, gano'n sila nagpapasadya ng mga Santo Niño, mga gano'n. Yung mga basketballista, yung mga liga, may sariling segment. Yung sa kanilang karosa is a mini basketball court na may mga Santo Niño naka-jersey, nag-lay up, nag-dribble, na may mga number sa likod. Dapat jersey talaga. At may mga crown. Kaya listen, mukhang Santo Niño na may buhok na Santo Niño, may crown, pero may basketball. Okay? Yung mga beautician, mayroong Moulin Rouge, Santo Niño, na may feather boa. Okay? Tapos talagang nagsasayaw lahat. And it's a bacchanalia in a way, kasi booking galore, mga Becky. Doon sa mga nagsasayaw. Kasi may mga cute eh. Diba? At the end of it, kasi isinuman. This is Tondo na sobrang uminom ng mga tao, diba? You don't exaggerate. That's what it is. Just report it. As I try to report out, except I haven't written about it. Kasi baka mamaya, yun ang problema. Another thing we should talk about is the more we talk about this, then the more we create the very same, the more we enable in a way, right? The policing and the clamping down on the very practices we're trying to celebrate. Kasi siguro, if people write about the Tondo thing and what's taking place, and how folk and pagan it is, the Diocese of Manila might put a stop to it. So na lang natin isulat. Kapag-torn ako eh, di ba? At sulat mo isulat, pero masiulat mo, mapapansin ang simbahan at magre-react ang mga pare. Di ba? Alam ba nila kung gaano ka-pagan na po ang Santo Niño na yan? Barbie doll!
Pero wala bang value mo?
But parang doon sa unang-una, sa huling-huli. The huling-huli sa Santo Niño. The real Santo Niño Tondo, na ang kanyang nasa nalaking ang bongga ng kanyang float. Para siyang tore. Tapos nandun siya, maliit na siya sa Santo Niño, na very phallic, na sumasayaw si Torres. Sinasayaw siya ng mga ano. Huling-huli siya, nandun yung mga mana ng nadadasal. Pero before that, ito na po yung carnival. Diba? Na talagang God, our favorite image of the Christian God is the Santo Niño. The Nazareno is the other one, but it's quite kind of niche. Diba? Medyo niche siya, parang Skiapo lang siya eh. Ang dami-dami Santo Niño all over the Philippines, diba? This is the most logical image of God for us because it's a child. Pwedeng utuin. Pwedeng utuin, pwedeng ihele-hele. Kaya siya sinasayaw eh, kasi bata nga naman, hindi ba hinihele mo siya. Pwede mo siyang isayaw, humingi ka ng favor, tatanggapin ka niya kasi he follows your likeness, not the other way around. Yung mga bombero, yung Santo Niño nila, bombero. Yung mga basketballista, yung Santo Niño nila, basketball. Yung mga parlorista, yung Santo Niño nila, naka-Moulin Rouge. Naka-Feather Boa, di ba? It is, yes.
So can you go back to the cardinals and grotesque?
No. Now, you're trying to do something similar in a way because you're trying to dissolve the hierarchy between the profane and the sacred, between the polite and the impolite, between the vulgar and the respectable, between the religious and the opposite of the religious, between the secular and the anti-secular. It is an attempt at a democracy, this whole story, of like mishmashing dialogue with narration. There's no distinction between the dialogue narration, the dialogue of the dialogue, the language of narration, the language of dialogue. They're identical, hindi mo nga makilala sino nagsasalita. That can be justified in a very sophisticated political sort of reading, but we know he's a beginning writer. So if it happened, it's really accident. Diba? I will not encourage you to go that way. I will encourage you, in fact, Andrew, to be ethnographic and to observe and to do a more realist portrayal of the very same reality that you have your finger on. Right, tama. Meron tayong, in the Philippines, this pagan kind of Catholicism. Diba? Hindi mo na siya kailangan i-exaggerate. Nandun na siya eh. Okay, the other thing is, nagdadalik ka ng mga santo. Ang kultura na yan is very, very interesting. Mga kamarero, kamarera, sila yung nag-aalaga ng mga santo. If you go to Marikina, sa Our Lady of the Abandon on Good Friday, there are 120 floats na Lenten lahat, Holy Week, di ba? Makikita mo kung sino ang mga kamarero, kamarera, puro mga Becky. At pabonggahan, kasi it's a declaration of influence and wealth. Magkano ginagastos for a karosa? 100,000. Yung papabulaklakan mo siya, papailawan mo siya, tapos yung mga damit ng mga santo at santa mo, burda yan. Ang tawag nila inuud, yung gold thread. Pag yung inuud ang damit ng santo mo, ano po, pinakabongga ka. Diba? So, nanonood ako niyan sa Marikina kasi nakikita ko yung mga friends kong bating. At talagang pinanula, parang bagong bihis ang aking Mater Dolorosa. At the other thing is, nag-orgy sila. May mga may-ari ng mga santo na mga kamarero-kamarera who are into each other. Oo. At hindi ako, my friend, sword speak can be elevated, I think, into a literary language. Ito hindi naman siya kasi sword speak, ang daming registers niya. In one story, biglang nag-iinarte yung nanay niya. Sabi ko, sino nagsasalita? Diba? Ikaw nagsasalita na talagang as a writer, parang itong language mo, nagsisword speak ka, ganyan-ganyan, hindi clear eh. So, I encourage you to keep your energy, but to also engage in more serious social research in order to understand more clearly the reality you're trying to depict. Because you have your finger on the pulse of it, it's real, it's there. It doesn't have to be invented. It just has to be reported. It's part of our own magical realism, which is so Di ba, nanganganak ng isla dito, yung mga babae.
So magic.
Yun na, kasama na siya. Ginagawa yan ng filmmakers natin. Paborito yan ni Broca. You call it moral dissonance. Yung mga pamilya na magnanakaw na nagdarasal bago kumain at mahal ang isa't isa pero nagnanakaw. Yung mga mamamatay tao na may mga sariling moralidad. Yung mga politician natin na mga immoral, na mga nagsisimba, at pag dumadating yung Santo Papa, pumupunta sa naiyan, yani ka ng kamay. Si Ella, when Pope John Paul II arrived, Vice President siya, hinalikan niya yung ring ni Pope John Paul, na rin ng asawa niya. Di ba yung declared, alam natin na asawa ni Ella? 9. Oh. Kayang gawin, di ba? So, ano yung sabihin nun? The coexistence of alternative moralities or contradictory moralities in the life of the one person or one family. Ang gandang subject for film, ang gandang subject for fiction, at hindi masyadong kailangan i-exaggerate kasi pag i-exaggerate mo, hindi siya real, isipin mo, invento lang, hindi totoo. Eh, totoo eh. Totoo.
Pero yun, mamaya itatanong pa rin natin sa may akta. So, kung yun ba, ano bang purpose niya? Bakit ganito yung lengguwahe yung ginamit niya? Kung bakit exaggerate nga ba niya? Or ano ba yung... Pero ang sinasabi sa iyo ngayon, Andrew, ay may ganitong outcome.
Posibilidad.
Merong ganitong effect sa reader mo. Yung, ano yung effect na yun? Some find it artificial, put on, no, na nakakabawas doon sa integridad ng yung akta. So, ay meron pa, tsaka yung register, ha? Register, very important sa pagdidisenyo ng mga akta. Lalo yung nagpasa yung ay, sorry, tumatakas sa
Yung second story.
Oh, yung second
Dibuhong
story,
martir.
Dibuhong martir.
May ano to, may attempt at historical fiction, may Gregorio del Pilar.
At may komentaryo nga din sa, meron tong ano, meron tong socio-economic aspect ng buhay ng bakla na to, yung struggle sa isang artist, no? That this starving artist. And paano ba siya...
Teacher na straight. This is a bakla character na in the early
love
life
sa kanya straight teacher.
Tanong ako dun sa pangalawang story. Kaya mamaya may comments. Tanong lang, kasi hindi ako makadecide kung si Maribik ba ay bakla or trans woman. Kasi malakas yung vibe niya na trans woman siya. So gusto ko lang malaman para maintindihan ko siya.
Tinakap, or sinusunod ko siya, may idea is that transitioning stage siya. Actually, as a writer, hindi ko pa rin siya ma-identify on that level.
Pero yung choice mo na tawagin siyang Maribik, tapos bilag-bilagan, binabati, mga medyo nalilito ako. So,
transitioning siya towards the transgender level sa imagination.
Bakit kailangan transitioning siya? Bakit hindi klaro na trans woman siya? Kasi parang hindi
Siguro
naman,
kailangan
yung kwento hindi siya tungkol sa pagka-transition. Iba yung concern niya. So, hindi ba pwede mag-commit ka dun sa character na bakla ba ito or trans woman?
Because the category bakla permits both and all. It is an amorphous.
Pero marami akong kilala trans women na ayaw magpatawag na bakla.
Pero pag trans woman, ba decision mo ba yun? Kasi siya ang nanay niya eh.
It's an activist term that you have to be of a particular kind of education and you have to have encountered it and understood it
Before you can
appropriate
use that.
for yourself.
Yung
But
trans.
you were called bakla as a child by bullies, by classmates. Meaning, bakla is part of your personal history. So I think in this case, may class dimension din siya. Tsaka may rural and urban divide. May mga ganun siya. So, this is a rural kind of bakla. At tapos, ito sa, di ba yung forget if, let's say, imagine that trans had not happened. The term would not heard it. This is bakla lang. Di ba? This is a bakla kwento na binibigay isang babae, tinawag na binabae, nagpapag-girl. Kasama siya doon. Ngayon, meron na tayong trans, inisip natin, mas proper yun. Di ba? But ito na nga, the culture lag of the rest of the country. Parang they're catching up, or they won't catch up, or maybe they should not catch up. Or maybe we are the problem. Di ba? Because the trans is actually part of a discourse that's class biased, class-based, a little colonial, may mga ganun. These are questions to ask, di ba? But ang feeling ko, this is just your garden variety bakla, in the blood one sense, na pre-trans, na maribig, yung nanay gusto siya maging babae, so may Freudian theory, dominant mother, na ginanon siya, nagkaganon, na in love sa teacher na straight, na in the end, ang gusto ko is the attempt to actually weave Philippine history into it. Via Paumbong, the town, and via Gregorio del Pilar, and an urban legend which was probably based on something real.
So,
Of how the Katipuneros and the resistance.
Totoo yung or legend?
Hindi, nagdiring babae talaga yung mga...
And then, since elementary, kinikwento na siya ng mga teacher namin on that church. Historical account. Tapos may panandang tato din na nakasulat. On that historical account.
Support na ako doon.
Sa Santiago.
Pero yung paglalasing, yung nilasing ng mga Kastila.
Meron din. Yung nagdadabit sa
So, ang ganda ng proyekto niya kasi pinapasok niya yung local history na hindi canonical history, di ba? Na kailangan malaman din ng mga tao. Na may role ng cross-dressing in revolution. At may mga nakulong during the American period. Meron nga sila in one newspaper article na ginawa, tinulaan ni Eugene. Si Baldomero something, may name siya. Na-aresto siya kasi nagdamit babae, tapos nag-smuggle ng mga guns to the resistance. Oo. And what it means, the assumption of the American reporter is that he's actually a fighter na lalaki. Kung talagang yun siya yun. Diba? That is an openness of it. Meron mga binabae na revolution. Diba? Kasi logical kasi pwede sino pa yung sa member mo ng marami kang miyembro sa resistance, may mga nagka-cross-dress na, hindi sila na yung pagdalin mo ng mga barel, diba?
Who wrote the books?
Eugene Nabasco.
He has a history of...
No. He wrote a poem which has as an epigraph something from the American period, a newspaper article, poking fun, kasi he was put in jail, na nakalabit babae pa siya. Tapos pinaano siya ng mga American soldiers, sinutukso siya. Pinagkakatuwaan siya.
Yung binabae?
Oo, yung binabae. So, the binabae is in resistance fighting, di ba? So, we can only just imagine, marami na rin yan, di ba? So, may magandang proyekto yung pangalawa, actually.
I like the detail of Paumbong. Because Paumbong is the site, that's the parasite of Urbana and Felisa. Paumbong is the town from where Felisa would write her sister, Urbana, who's in Manila. And we can read, because of Andrew's story, I'm now, my thesis, is in Urbana and Felisa. And I'm now reading it because of this figure of the Binabae. So we can read Urbana and Felisa, not just a treatise on being a woman, but also being Binabae in many ways. Urbana, Felisa, Amadeo, everyone in the epistolary.
Yeah. And Paumbong is famous for suka. I have to bring that up.
Okay.
Masarap ang Paumbong na suka.
Dibuhong martir. Kamiyak na isa sa akin, guys.
Ang bumibuelo si John,
Well, kasi mga chika-chika muna habang naghihintay. Oo. Gina-clarify ko yun. Yung mga comments, katulad din napagod, actually hindi na ako napagod doon sa kanonisasyon. Ang comment ko nga ito, it's just excruciating because it's too long. Yung parang if it's campy like that, pwede siyang ma-endure for only a short burst. Pero pag ganun kahaba, talagang parang ano siya, parang masyadong mahirap yung pag ganun siya kahaba. It brought to mind sa akin yung story ni John Benga, sinabanggit na yung Armor, na tungkol din sa gay pageant, na matandang bakla na never pa nanalo sa gay pageant, so ngayon gusto niyang mag-pageant. Tapos ang maganda dito is, hindi ganito yung language, yung elegant yung English, pero yung during the pageant, yung mga contestants, sila yung nagdadala ng mga campy na sections, yung mga sagot ng mga bakla. And that's the campy, really, bakla sections of the story, which is really about more than just gay pageantry. So, yun yung nakikita ko din, mas complex siya. And nakikita ko din dito yun.
So that we can understand the achievement of the stories here. Now, I come from Mindanao. You are, I assume, familiar with Mindanao?
Not really.
Probably, yes, that might be a wrong assumption. Some people don't even, or have not even been there in Mindanao. And it's just 1 hour plane trip, So, but in any case, Mindanao is there. It's part of the country. Now, we are here empowering the LGBT voice. But in Mindanao, we don't have a voice. So whether you're LGBT or otherwise, there is no voice because that part of the country has been neglected.
Not with the president from there right now.
Yeah, but in any case, for the longest time, and even up to now, Mindanao doesn't really figure in the national consciousness. I mean, it's there, it's in the news, the president is there, the vote is always mentioned, but you have to live in Mindanao to understand the situation in Mindanao. I was born in Cagayan de Oro. I studied in Marawi City. I taught in Iligan. So I was rooted in that place, that culture. I feel very strongly about the conditions in Mindanao. When writers in Mindanao are not given space in the publication in Metro Manila, we feel very bad. So in the 1990s, we tried to come up with the anthology Mindanao Harvest, which is a small effort to give voice to the writers in Mindanao. So we have Antonio Enriquez, Medyo Enriquez, Anthony Vera Ford, Camra Ayala. So those are some of the names writing in Mindanao then, 1990s. Mindanao is made up of 3 groups of people. You have the largest group of the Christians, the second, the Muslims, the third, the Nuns. In that first anthology, we were all Christians. The representation is skewed on one side, Christian Islam, because the writers, mostly at the time, were mostly Christians. We had one Muslim writer, Ibrahim Jubair, and he was for the longest time the only Muslim writer that the country knew about, because he was writing for national publications. And when they think of Mindanao literature, they think of the stories of Ibrahim Jubair. After him, wala na.
Shalbi aside.
Shalbi aside is still around.
Still around.
Yeah.
Nakatulog somewhere.
Yeah. So in any case,
what about human writers? Wala talaga.
Sa first anthology, wala. They were not writing at all. So 1990s, 1990s. And so we did not follow that up until just recently, because when we conducted with PEN, conducted a teaching literature seminar, we had guest teachers from the high school or colleges around Iligan. They came and said, we don't have any materials. Who are our writers? So we thought we would come up with the next Mindanao Harvest. So there was a Mindanao Harvest 1, Mindanao Harvest 2. Actually, Mindanao Harvest 1 and 2, it was supposed to be just one Mindanao Harvest. But New Day at the time was thinking, oh, it's too thick, we cannot, this woman said, you have to cut it into 2. So basically, economic consideration, the first volume became the stories, and then the second volume, drama and poetry. So between 1 and 2 came out in 1994, 1993, and then 1994. So basically, that was it. So it's the next one, yung Mindanao Harvest 3, mga folk tales from different ethnic groups. So, yun. Merong mga lumat, pero karamihan mga different Muslim groups. Maranao, Tausu, Mindanao, maraming mga folk tales. The next one was, as a result of that conference, was the Mindanao Harvest 4. Kami, because we are literature teachers, we try to have some sort of advocacy. We were thinking, if we will not do it, nobody else will do it for us. And the default effect would be nobody will hear us. Our voices will continue to be still, silence. We are already invisible, we cannot be heard, we are not part of this nation. Anyway, that's the feeling of some people there. So we tried to come up with Mindanao Harvest 4, which is an anthology of contemporary writers. So it turned out this group would be composed of younger writers. Secret is going to be there. And requirement namin is born or based in Mindanao. Secret was born in Zamboanga, but she is now and then transferred to Quezon City, and then transferred to Dumaguete. So we have writers who are like that, They move from place to place. But she is still associated as a Mindanao writer. And her stories have that strong Mindanao flavor. Even the 2 stories that are in this workshop, based in Mindanao or Zamboanga. But in any case, we were surprised. There are now a lot of younger writers writing. Pero hindi pa lumabas yung works nila, karamihan. So, itong anthology, which will be coming out, if not this month, next month, will, for the first time, we have about 60 writers in that collection. Alright. So, Mindanao writers, giving voice to the Mindanao writers lang. How about giving voice to the LGBT writers from Mindanao? Wala. Nobody would write at all. I mean, do you think there are no gay writers in Mindanao?
We don't see anyone. We don't know.
We don't know because they will not write. Even if they are gay.
Si Tenyo Mansakan. Gutierrez Mansakan.
Yes, but you wrote essays. Yeah, I mean, we have actually writers, no? But they would not advertise themselves as gay.
Si Teng lang ha.
Si Teng lang.
Si Teng.
Oh, si Teng lang. But we have si Taib. Alright. He was a fellow in the LGBTQ Writers Workshop 2 years ago. And he submitted an essay. It was a gay, it was really political essay about the plight of the Kingdom House. You know, no? So walang gay element sa essay niya. And then, well, anyway, let me just continue with this story, because he is obviously gay. You know? And I asked him, "Are you gay?" Yes. Sabi niya, "Yes." So, are you out? Sabi niya, no. Why? They will be killed.
Muslim.
He was Muslim from Maginda. Now, you think you write about your gay experiences, you know, you can be comfy, you can be happy, and it's alright with you. It doesn't change your life. It's just self-expression, no? For some people, it is life or death. I mean, at this time.
Hindi filmmakers na.
Huh?
Si Ramen ba yun? Para the one with the toasty, you know?
Yeah. Alright, in other words, it's very, very difficult. And I could understand, especially in the Muslim community, that kind of admission is tantamount to, I don't know, heresy, and therefore is punishable by death. And I was talking to one of the fellows here who happened to have a boyfriend from Russia, and he talked about why his boyfriend doesn't want to stay in Russia. They would be killed. I said, you know, all these things, we are happy here because we are more or less safe, you know. In some places, even up to now, even in the country, even outside places like Russia, if you are identified as gay, you can be punished. And punished, you know, you can be thrown from a tall building just because you are what you are. I mean, of course, that's terrible. So you can understand why especially Muslims, no, Muslim writers who are gay would not even write about themselves in that way. And therefore, for somebody to admit that in this workshop, that he is really taking a lot of risk to his life. And so I can understand why he would not like to be videotaped, especially since that is going to be placed on Facebook. His relatives will find out and they will mark him. So that is the context. His submission on the stories here is a very brave act. It is an assertion of himself. He is what he is. He's willing to accept what he is, but other people in the society would not. And therefore, he would like to respect that feeling, by just not pushing himself on their faces. Because you have to respect their sensitivities as well. They don't want it, don't force. So,
Yes.
that's the kind of risk that he's taking here.
Yeah, and may I share that the author actually wrote to us ahead before submitting and made a request that should he get in, that he may actually be allowed to use a pseudonym, and that no documentation of his presence here be made or made public. So this was before the end of the application period. So I was thinking, well, hindi naman siya sure na huwag na natin problemahin muna kasi allow him to apply, baka na hindi bumasa. Bumasa! Naging problema. Meaning, we had to discuss it as a team, how we would approach this. So the camera there is skewed this way, and there's a gap. So he is not visible. Every time I've taken pictures, medyo naka-angle din ganon. We're respecting the request of the author. This is reality check, guys. We've been having too much fun thinking that we all are sharing a uniform world. It's not a uniformly equal or unequal world. Some places are more unequal than others. And the example is the context for this writer's work and his own life. So, that in the end, we are here to help the writer get better as a writer and probably embolden him a little bit more. Because this is already a very bold thing to do. That somewhere down the line, the possibility, the door might open for a more public avowal, right, of his own subjectivity as an LGBTQ writer. He is not alone, because I've been doing, part of the Global Race things means I get to travel, right? I've been meeting them. There are queer activists who are Muslims from all over, different parts of the world. And they are queering Islam. They are queering the Quran. They're finding, wala naman kasi magisterium ang Quran, ang Islam na parang tayo meron eh. We have the magisterium of the Pope and his cardinals, and they decide on matters of doctrine. Sila, different imams will have different ways of looking. So may mga liberal imams, may queer imams sa London. May mga queer imams sa Turkey. They're queering the Islam and they're owning it. And so it's not a lost cause. You don't have to, because it's not just a matter of religion. It's easy to tell this particular person, I know, just stop being a Muslim. Diba? Like ikaw, if you have a problem with Christianity, then stop being a Christian, which has been the solution for many gay men who come out of evangelical backgrounds. Talagang wala silang way to reconcile kasi evangelical eh, diba? So, just stop being a practicing Christian altogether. In other parts of the world, that means surrendering their cultural identity. It's not just their religious identity. Their very cultural identity goes out the window with Islam. So, hindi nila kayang gawin. So, they're queering it. The writer is not alone. If he wants to clear a space to be who he is within his cultural identity, it can be done. We are here to cheer him on. And a way of cheering him on is to actually help him become better as a writer. Right? Because I'm sorry, with your talent as a writer, you can go places. You can assert yourself. You can. Like these mga very vocal imams are very, very articulate, very intelligent, the way they read the Quran. Well, nakikita mo talagang pushing the pero you can only push so far. Pero nahihirapan, these are women eh. Some of the imams are women. So they're having a hard time, but they're doing it. Can be done. Yeah, so with that, we begin. Yeah.
Alright, so we will invite comments
On the two stories.
on the stories. Let's start with the fellows. As usual. Alright, Carlo.
I just have to, siguro mas tanong sila, in terms of, bago nagsimula yung session, kapag-push ko ang mga cultural objects that comes from Muslims. I do catch myself parang parang stuck in a kind of image of what a Muslim is. And then I would be confronted by the reality na, hindi pala sila ganito, or yung mga naikintal na mga imahen sa akin. And you know, I mean, just by me saying, I have Muslim friends and they're not like this and that, parang I really catch myself. And so parang ang tanong ko lang siguro dito is, parang I get the sense, especially doon sa unang kwento, na I get the sense that there is a sort of ornamental, oriental prettiness in the presentation of the women and how they are and how they love. Na parang meron pa rin parang ano tawag dito, parang production number that is being presented to us. Parang siguro ang tinatanong ko na lang din siguro dito is yung mga sarili kong anxiety about approaching, you know, these texts and cultural objects. And then the second one is again dun sa unang kwento pa rin na siguro mas general na tanong din to dahil lumalabas lagi maraming mga sandali sa mga nabasa na natin na mga teksto na laging meron na teteki or laging merong may horrible death that happens in a rather pretty pictures. Parang ang tanong ko dito is parang bakit parang laging necessary na yung homosexuality or any show of homosexual desire is a kind of infection to the pretty picture that is being, you know, the pretty heterosexual picture, you know. Like katulad sa unang kwento na parang yung desire ni Shaima at saka nung servant is a kind of parang namatay yung asawa niya, no? Namatay yung asawa ni Shaima, na parang it's the homosexual desire that always causes this kind of destruction of a rather pretty picture. Yeah. So rin yung mga tanong ko and mga anxieties ko about it.
Okay. I agree that it seems that in the first story, the Muslimness is ornamental. If they were Muslim and if this was any oppressed woman who happened to murder her arranged marriage husband, I would have still liked it as a story. However, it was the ornamental aspects of being Muslim that threw me off. Like, the wedding, the necessity for a son, for her to inherit the farm, right? She needed to have a son before she can inherit the farm. So she planned the murder after getting a son, right? Or did I imagine? Okay, and then which takes me to the second story, where it is obviously integral. The Muslimness is integral to the story. This could not have been told by in any other backdrop. This could not have been obvious for obvious horrifying reasons. For revision, my suggestion would be to make the murder less of a M. Night Shyamalan twist. It was, oh no, a twist! Okay. It wasn't an enjoyable twist. It could have been foreshadowed better, or the author could have let us in on the murder so that we are cheering her on. Oh, let's cheer her on, kill her husband. Parang diba? Parang we're conspirators. Kasi I was already liking her as a person. I would have approved of her murder plans. And whodunit would have been a mystery is not as enjoyable as a caper. A murder caper by a doctor who was refused the capacity to practice her craft. Because Di ba that's... Actually, even the lesbian part seemed ornamental. It could have been just a murder. Then I would have enjoyed it.
I'm not very familiar with Muslim practices or whatever it is that I'm familiar with is reported by non-Muslims. So this doesn't plunge into this kind of culture. The thing though is that the setting is kind of floating in both stories. So I couldn't really place. Parang at some points I felt like this seems so long ago, but then maybe this is how it really is. But because walang anchor to where it is located, when and where it is located, I couldn't exactly place it and situate myself in the middle of the story.
That's a good suggestion. It would not be difficult, no? Just in the beginning, establish the setting, the place, and the time of this. But this is obviously modern, because they talk about universities and all that. But because of the society, the social manners, they seem like they belong to the past, but they exist up to now in certain settings among Muslims. But we can ask the author later on, because it did not seem like this is the stories set in Zamboanga or Marawi or Cotabato. They seem to be set in Manila. No? And probably the writer could do it because he's not really as constrained as the writers in Mindanao. If you are living in your own communities, in Muslim communities, you probably won't be able to write this way. Here, if you are living in Manila, you are more open. You can be more adventurous, in other words. But is that the reason why there is no specific setting here, or what? We can ask the author later on. But that's a good observation because we were, Sigrid and I were talking about it. Santino. Very good. So I would like to address more the idea of the ornamental qualities of the stories. Ornamental kaya or kasi for us ornamental because we don't use like the clothes na daming jewelry and you notice that the author is fond of doing that. What is the impetus for that kind of tendency? Is that because you are writing, you are being true to the social milieu of that culture, no? I mean, they are really very conscious of how you dress up, dressing up not just in terms of, but it's saying a lot of things. Your clout, your power, your wealth. It is the whole system of vocabulary. You're saying a lot of things about yourself, your social standing in the community, with the way you dress up, the way, whatever you wear, the gold bangles, the earrings, the rings, all the fingers would have rings. No? So it says something. If you can afford only one ring, it says something also. So you don't want people to think that you don't have any money. So you put 10 rings in your 10 fingers, 20, what's it? That kind of social practice would be strange for outsiders probably, and therefore you might interpret these things as decoration. Because rings are decoration, but they are also social symbols. The same thing with the clothes.
I just want to respond to Cupcake's remark earlier about, and in conjunction to, I very much agree with Carlo, na parang yung theatricality nung paglalatag ng mundong yun, o nung yung kay Cupcake na gustong tugunan yung remark na it would have worked even without the Islamic prosthetics.
Or even the lesbian.
But gusto ko siguro igiit yung bahagi ng burden of representation ng other o ng regional, yung kailangan niya i-justify yung necessity na maaari namang matter of fact, or pwede arbitrary. So ayun. So hindi ako komportable na to fuss over whether these prostheses should be here or not. Pero hindi ako komportable sa yung ornamentality niya, hindi ako dun sa dami ng props o dun sa material, na dun sa unfolding, na dun sa movement, na dun sa paglalatag ng mga objects na to.
Gusto ko na i-qualify ko kang sabi ko ng presentation ng ornamentality and the witness. Parang it is always presented to us like this, for the non-Muslim, for us to understand. Parang doon ako naging, hindi ko siya ino-orientalize ako. Yung nagsasabi na, oh, this is pretty or ornamental. It's always like it's presented to us in this specific kind of theatricality. And parang gusto ina-approach ko yun in a kind of anxious manner. Parang, kasi may mga kilala ko ng Muslim na hindi sila ganito. Sila, hindi.
Pero naramdaman ko na parang nasa itablado nga siya. Hindi ganun sobrang compact ng production number na ginamit kong Tapos, apprehensive ako sa kanya kasi hindi ako komportable doon sa pagiging stage nga ng pakiramdam. Na alam kong kahit na same props or same milieu, maaaring hindi siya mag-unfold na ganun ang dating. Apprehensive ako din at the same time kasi I believe that fetishes can pag-fetishize kahit na nakaka-compromise siya is always valid at inevitable na muhon ng ahensya ng fetish.
I think we're getting confused with the word ornamental kasi. But I mean, any story will have ornaments. Ornaments stand for objects. And of course, there will always be objects in any good story kasi you expect a story to world its world. I think the charge we can level up potentially at these two stories is that of exoticism and the exoticizing of the different or the other. And on one hand, I agree with Christian that how else can it be done? I mean, this is a marginal reality. We're not immersed in this reality, so anything we will write about just to represent it, even in the simplest way, would be exotic. Yes, but on the other hand, you do sense this foregrounding of a certain kind of theatricality, which is not so much just in the objects being enumerated using proper nouns. So you understand you're being given a lexicon of new objects, diba? No, it's not just that. Okay, although you can rein that in and basically go for the common noun na rather than the proper noun, para hindi man napatagtad kami na maraming mga ganon. But it's in the presentation of female circumcision. It's in the density of events that are obviously a little exceptional for an ordinary, even for an ordinary Filipino Muslim, to be happening only to one character, and you realize, okay, he's cramming in a whole cultural, he's trying to put in as much cultural content so that we get just from these two stories a heavy, substantial meal that he's offering us of this Muslim world that we're not familiar with. We can perhaps take some issue with that, particularly if it already produces undesirable artistic effects. For example, yung idea nga na parang too much. What's the story now? Kasi you're lost in this cataloging of otherness, diba? What's the story now? In the first story, clear. In the second story, yun na nga, may cataloging na parang, okay, medyo we go through the ritual life of someone well off, and we're being given the fact that she is regimented, diba, by this life. But some of those things happening and some of those objects may be too dense already, and we may declutter and remove some things, and we'll get to the bones of the story and we see the story better. Yun yung ano ko. The other question has to do with the fact that the writer is obviously not a woman. The writer's alive in front of us. The writer is not a woman. The writer is LGBTQ, or else he wouldn't be here. So we can more or less say either B or G, right? Or Q. Pwede rin Q, we don't know. We have to ask later. Why talk about the oppression of cisgendered heterosexual or cisgendered women? Not necessarily, who are not, and you are not yourself a woman. In other words, is the statement being made, at least partially, about how the difficulty of writing about once being a gay man as a gay Muslim man in the Philippines is such that you can only do so through analogy with the oppression of women within the same community or the same culture. Parang ganun yung iniisip ko. Na yun ba ang entry point to coming out with the gay topic about being Muslim and gay in Mindanao? We have to do it first through the oppression, by understanding the oppression of women. Di ba? Parang ganun. Which is such a lovely intersection that we are proposing. Which goes back to Joanna's, who's not here.
I'm here.
You're here. Question from, earth-shaking question from yesterday, an ethical imperative, right? What right do we have within LGBTQ coalitional identity, which is provisional and full of litigiousness and potential issues and problems? How much right do we have to appropriate the stories of other identities within that spectrum, diba? If we are actually only one specific part of it, and we're not all of it. Because otherwise, we're going back to another queer humanism, which means, I'm queer, I can appropriate the story of the transgender. I can appropriate the story of the lesbian, I can appropriate, gano'n, diba? Ito, the lesbian woman, right? So that's a real big question, and I don't think we will all arrive at the same answer. Or maybe the idea is not to arrive at one answer, there are many potential answers. The other thing I want to say is that this reminds me of Bessie Head, Collector of Treasures. She's a South African writer. Na more or less ganun din yung kwento niya, at least the first story, na a woman is so oppressed that she ends up having to kill her husband. And in the end, you don't take it against her. In that story, she succeeds. The writer succeeds in winning the reader over to the justice in what she had to do. Right? Because terrible things are done by the man. Terrible things are done by the man. So when she kills him by cutting off his penis. This is pre-Lorena Bobbitt. This is an old story by Bessie Head, who was a biracial child who was put in prison. Her background as a writer is really horrific also. She was raped, ganyan, whatever. But here, the poor guy naman, poisoned by the heroine, by the protagonist, who's anti-heroic somehow, kasi, diba? So may meron tayong potential na issue to take with it, no? I'm not saying that we cannot sympathize with her, but she's certainly not as heroic, for example, as the other women characters coming from other parts of the global south with the same really oppressive situation, who take matters into their own hands and end up killing their husbands. So may tradition of writing siya na hindi lang Muslim, but it's bigger, but I'm not too sure that I am entirely won over by her. I almost think in the end, I don't like her. She is mean. She's like she is Regina. She is Regina George. She's a mean girl.
Never more.
Because you're a mean girl.
I would like to add to the points raised by Neil, right? So here what we can see is a redirection. So what happens is the object speaks through, and unfortunately, on behalf of for the others, what I see is coalitional politics or alliances made among objects in a patriarchal world. So parang, and I see that among gay men, parang nakikita nila, I think, and hindi ako sure if I'm correct, but what I see is that in some gay writings, gay men realize that there is, a parallelism or analogy between their oppression and that of the women. So I think it's a good thing, all right? But of course, it bears asking, what right have we really? Sa akin, I wouldn't say na you cannot write about it as long as you do it well, right? As long as you do it with justice. Bakit? Can't I write about heterosexual men? Right? I mean, kaya nga siya imaginative world di ba? As long as you are not going to, exoticize, you're not going to, what do you call this, objectify, or, do things that are not desirable, right? As long as as long as it's ethical, and politically perhaps progressive, okay? But what I like about the story is this, I read it in the tradition of family flags, okay, fried green tomatoes at the Whistle Stop Cafe. There's this tradition of lesbian writing in the 70s, which had become, so stereotypical and so predictable. Bad guys, good women. Bad guys have to be annihilated, right? So patayin natin. So what I teach my class when they write lesbian stories or about women is this. I want the woman to leave the husband despite the fact that the husband is good. That for me is a challenge. Hindi kasi para sa akin, easy excuse yun na masamang asawa, patayin natin, happy tayo together, lesbians or women, right? That's easy and that's too predictable. And for me, that's the challenge that I'm going to ask, our writer to work on. Kasi, ano kung meaning natin yung babae? But what I want to see is the genuineness, diba? Of the relationship. I think gusto ko yung angulo na yung lalaki, poor husband, right? Parang namatay yan siya bigla. Gusto ko yun. Kasi ayaw ko na yung typical na masama yung husband, patayin siya. Diba? Gusto ko makita na talagang kahit napakabait niya,
Kinatay pa rin siya.
Kinatay pa rin siya. Okay? Parang gano'n. Kasi yung challenge, maging panipaniwala. Diba? Pero ang kulang sa akin yung characterization. Diba? Nung babae.
No, pag pinatay pa rin siya, are we supposed to like the one na pumatay sa kanya?
Depende. Diba? Ako, I would like. No, what I'm saying is, there has to be a reason, right? And I'm saying it's characterization Pero, I don't know, lighting is such a very problematic concept for me. Alright? Pero yun ang gusto ko, na nakikita ko isa sa mga strengths yun na whether iwanan, maybe hindi ka patayin, pero iwanan or something mawat. But the point is, typical na kasi masyado yung patayin yung lalaking masama. Ginawa rin siya sa yan, di ba? Sa drop it on their scale. Di ba? So, merong tradition na pinagalingan yung kwento. Pero dito, lesbian. And so, sa akin, okay yung kwento. Sana lang, mas magandang worlding, mas magandang characterization. It's interesting, but it's more challenging. That it be attacked, that the author considered, okay, working on it differently.
I was thinking that what justifies the coalitional politics that you were aspiring, what you wanted for it to espouse, is that in fact there's a critique of the oppressive structure. But if the person standing in to represent that structure is not understand, it's kind of diba? We will sympathize as queer readers with a woman who is oppressed because we will understand that oppression intersects with our own. But we have to see it. If this particular man does not seem to have been a particularly evil character. So it's interesting, we can ask the author, kasi he's espousing Islam Muslimness at the same time that he wants to espouse gayness or his own sexual difference. Diba? You are critiquing Muslimness and basically throwing out the baby with the bathwater by doing something like this where the rejection is wholesale. Diba? Aren't there aspects and corners in Muslim reality that are actually good, that are positive, that are wonderful? So to be embodied, for example, in the existence of good Muslim men. Diba? So complexity, complicate the vision a bit. The second story has more of it, admittedly, because in fact it doesn't have that simple sort of like punishment sort of plot, right? It's a little more complex. And what I like most about it is the brave
kind of storytelling na kahit yung pangalawang kwento, naka-intersperse yung memory, yung italics, or time present time. Kahit yung the way everything is described, it's kind of imagined luminosity ng mga words na ginamit, yung pacing. So, nandun siya sa fantasy production. Therefore, I think it's really working from within yung the hidden stuff. Which means that it's not going so much for a critique of the system. It's just describing how the system works or operates. And yung logical causality ng kwento nito na nandiyan yung system, pero wala nang talagang impending critique na project dito except to describe yung highly hierarchical system, the way it works, the way it does not work, ganun klase. At yun siguro din yung drawback nitong dalawang kwento. Kasi working from within, then parang topical lang lahat. Nawawala ng social context yung quite pivotal issues dito. Kunyari yung class love sa first story. Parang napakadosan nung Chinini dito sa klase ng positionality niya. So parang walang social context in which to understand. Dahil nga from within, parang given na lang na nangyayari ito at hindi na lang ko-complain yung alipin doon sa kanyang among mobility sa ganung klase disjunct ng buhay nila. Sa second one naman, yung female circumcision, topical din. Parang naging highly ornamentalized, parang focus yung lushness at yung luminosity itong storytelling. Nawawalan tuloy ng depth to a certain extent dahil nga hindi dinidiscuss yung a bit of context pa na para mas higit na maintindihan itong mga issues na to or mas higit na ma-complicate yung mga issues na to other than the way it's been described or the way it's been unfolded in the story. So baka yun yung kailangan pang pag-isipan ng author dito, parang higit na depth at hindi siya maging level of ornament lang ay expound din yung motivations for or yung mindsets ng mga tao when it comes to these kinds of women's issues. As we move along, kailangan din pag-isipan ng author. Parang ang nakita ko dito yung gayness dito, yung queerness nung nasa storytelling. It's a gay author queering ito Muslim world na to, Islamic world na to, using female characters as main channels. So parang channeling ba ng kanyang queerness. No? So yung queerness na yun, yung lushness niya, yung how it works, how it does not work. At parang yung a bit campy to a large extent. Pero campy na walang irony. Which means that hindi natin naiintindihan talaga why it's cruising along that quickly. Samantalang sa atin, syempre, coming from the outside, hindi man ganun ka-quickly dapat itong mga pacing na ito at parang nagto-flow lang to its conclusion from the author's point of view. pwede yung pag-isipan yun eh. Bakit women? Bakit hindi iba pang klase identities na mas gusto may challenge ng author, no? So, sa both stories, it's really just a glimpse of a very specific Islamic culture, yung nobility. Ibig sabihin, parang hindi natin nakikita. Gusto ko lang tanongin yung author mamaya, meron ka bang kwento na ibang dimensions naman na hindi lang itong mga alpha women na to ang focus, no? Baka pwedeng na-reach din itong ganitong klase worldly natin. At siguro, yung a bit of hesitation ko rin banggitin yun na yung range na yun. Kasi it's really your call kung yun ang gusto mong i-focus na klase ng issues about this kind of world. No? So, baka kailangan lang pang mag-range para ma-explore mo yung potential mo as a writer na hindi lang one kwento after the other na babae, ability, but it moves along towards greater exploration. Kasi that's also a subject positionality mo eh. Hindi ka lang naman Muslim. So ang tayong mga concerns probably ng Muslim taken out of that specific context ng Zamboanganes or what? What does being a Muslim, queer, or gay person mean in the context of your work with, hindi ko kailangan magiging yung word. Ibig sabihin, yung dealing with non-Muslim, predominantly non-Muslim, yung taken out of your comfort zone mo, in which a lot more people are of the similar faith. So, parang bigyan mo rin kami na range na kung saan ay itong identity na to, how it flows or how it does not flow in various kinds of contexts rather than puro ganitong kwento lang na isang klase mundo lang ang nare-represent.
That's true. In these two stories, and in the first story, the way of rebelling is maski na mabait yung husband, but essentially the system was something that she did not really like. And so the husband, yung mabait na husband, represented that oppressive system. Napatayin siya. That's the motivation. Parang kulang. Pero anyway, si Roland, okay naman. Buti patayin yung mabait na husband. No? Kasi the predictable thing is the abusive husband would have to be killed. Pero dito, kasi mabait, bago siya.
Ako, kasi, okay, baka nang misinterpret ako, mabait-bait ko kaya, may heroes ako.
Sabi ko, may heroes ka.
Pero may heroes kasi one on top of the other, it forms something. Right? They're so on top of the other. But let me clarify again. I think the thing is, complexity. Kasi diba, characters, hetero, homo, queer, whatever, can be evil. Can be good, can be bad. I think what I would request, the writer to work on is yung complexity. Para makita ko, kasi yung problema dito sa teksto, kulang. Diba? Interestingly, kasi parang siyang tale eh. When I read it, parang hindi siya realist text of some sort. To me, it felt like a tale, a mythic, something like that, no? And interesting. But I think any choice that we make, will have its own consequences. For instance, a writer writing about lesbians, diba? I mean, lesbians are women loving women, diba? And then murderous pa yung ending. I think meron yung repercussions, right? So, kailangan isipin mabuti, diba?
But it's I'm troubled, it's a man writing it to say.
Yeah, I agree with you. Yeah, so,
if we are striving for that coalitional, aspirational thing, ano yung ating basis for it? Our common meanness? Our common evilness? It should be the suffering, we can resonate with the suffering. Eh, hindi naman siya nag-suffer.
Pero
Didn't she suffer for Cersei?
Ang ulang ng characterization niya, di ba? But we see more about the woman and about the relationship between them, and their dynamics, then baka mas magiging convincing. But all I'm saying is, you cannot chuck out the window the possibility that this can happen, that this is a logical outcome, or this can be a potentially wonderful outcome for the story. Yun ang point ko. But yung points mo, I agree. No? Yun.
the author for trying to represent Islamic world. Sabi niya na Orientalist, other images na flooded over tayo ng mga author. Pero itong Gardens Beneath kasi, it echoes a famous Quran image of what heaven is. Parang pinakalangit na. At ang gusto ko dito yung attempt na ipakita yung kahit ang mahirap kasing questionin ang langit para sa isang Muslim marahil kasi parang isang pagkakasala siya batay sa kanila. Pero mapapansin ko kasi doon sa ending itong Gardens Beneath, halos hindi ko mapansin yung sinabi siya dito eh. If only the aisles and turned into ladders that would stretch ever upward, I shall walk every flight of it, on and on to a place of the clouds and silence a pair of goats once with me. So, meron dito parang longing to escape. Yung mismong idea ng heaven, binabatikos niya. Kasi pag yung konsepto kasi nila ng langit, in the age of extremism, di ba? Ito yung pag-brainwash daw nila dun sa mga nag-jihad, yung mga nag-bomba, di ba? Yung
Virgins. You will be welcome by virgins.
O yung virgins. Pero paano magiging relevant yun para sa isang babae? I mean, gusto mo bang pumunta sa isang langit na nandiyan, puro mga babae, puro serving? So, this is an attempt to, siguro, interrogate that idea. Kasi parang inaangkin din yung idea ng langit na yun. So, bilib ako dun sa nakikita kong attempt na yun. Pero tulad ng sinabi ng iba, lalo na dun sa circumcision, medyo step away ako dun sa part na yun. Kasi ritualize siya at parang kitang-kita mo yung director na sumisigaw siguro na may megaphone, putulin yan, dito yan. Yung parang nakikita mo talaga yung pagkakatabas niya as spectacle. Kahit yung pagkakat ng cloth, tapos yung sigaw, yung impit na sigaw ng batang babae, hiniwa siya. Alam mo na kailangang ma-share mo yung naramdamang pain ng kid nung tinanggal yung that side of pleasure. Pero torn ka dun sa sa eksena eh. Kasi alam mo na sinet up ka dun sa scene. Hindi ko alam kung dahil masyado lang ako masuspetyoso dun sa ganung mga eksena. Epekto siguro yun na masyado discuss, diba? Pero gusto ko siyang tanungin dun sa paano umabot dun sa level na yun yung imahinasyon. Diba? Parang, kasi kung umaalis ka dun sa masyadong bridges ba ng imagine, parang nakakaskas ng paulit-ulit yung path. So, sinusubukan mo siguro humanap ng ibang landas na hindi masyadong dinadaanan ng mga gulong na yon. And when you make a clearing with that discursive practice, what happens? So, sabi kanina, magiging dangerous para dun sa author yung ginagawa niya. Pero sa isang banda, hindi lang siya dangerous para dun sa author. Dangerous din siya para dun sa mga people of that faith. Natatanungin, diba? Bakit ako nandito? Bakit ko pinaniniwalaan ito? At yun yung binigay yung dalawang text sa akin.
John?
Sa akin yung comment, so siguro more of a request kay Ibrahim for future stories. Kasi ang dalawang story kasi tungkol sa arranged marriage na mga babae, ang kwento ng babae. Gusto ko natin malaman, baka may kwento rin yung mga lalaki. Kaya I'm sure, paano pagbating ka? no, na Muslim ka, bading ka, at syempre, i-arrange yung marriage, no, wala kang mga may kwento, kasi may kaibigan akong Maranao na hindi na uuwi sa kanila, umuwi sa Marawi kasi may Marawi stage. Kasi ayaw nga niya, kasi ang ultimate nung umuwi siya from studies sa UK, parang mas saleable na siya, no, for arranged marriage. Yun ang natakutan niya, ay umuwi doon kasi yung nanay niya, yung walang iniisip kundi i-arrange na siya, no, for marriage. Bating nga siya, may lover siya dito sa Manila. So, gusto ko malaman yung kwentong gano'n, no? And then next, gusto ko rin malaman yung mga kwento ng, yung sabi ni Roland kasi, yung masyadong alta ito, no? Kaya na-highlight ko doon yung pagiging decorative ng Muslim culture, no? Pero gusto ko alam mo, may pari akong kaibigan na taga Mindanao, na kung gusto niya manghada, pupunta siya sa sinehan sa Iligan. At marami daw mga Muslim doon, mga traders, na gusto lang magparaos. So, doon siya nanghada, no? So, may ganyan. And then, meron akong kaibigan. Ito ko pare. Ito talaga, meron akong kaibigan, ito position of leader sila. Oo. So, sa Palawan, may kaibigan ako na medyo suki na callboy na Muslim. Kasi ang Southern Palawan is Islam, no? Muslim sila. No? So, itong callboy, nag-callboy siya sa Puerto Princesa, Muslim siya, pero hindi naman pinag-usapan kasi yung religion at transaction, di ba? So, alam na Muslim siya, no? So yung mga ganyang stories sana, no? Gusto kong, hindi ko alam kung may alam ng mga gano'n, narinig mo yun. No, sure, narinig mo yun, sure. No? Gusto kong mabasa sana, no? Which I know, again, potentially dangerous, no? When you write about it, no? Pero...
You cannot publish that.
Okay lang, email lang sa akin.
Carbon copy po.
Pseudonym, no? Publish lang sa London with pseudonym, no? Yung diretso sa London ng publication. Yung ginawa kasi sa kwento, alam mo, naawa ko sa mga purita, no, na Muslim na sa labas ng gate, pag-a-attend sila ng wedding. Mas gusto kong marinig yung kwento nila nung mga nasa laylayan, no? Kasi parang, yun nga, no? Kaya, yun, parang Aladdin tuloy yung labas ng kwento, no? So, or baka Ibrahim takot kang sulatin yun. Kaya, nag-concentrate ka doon sa mga babae na.
May stories naman.
May stories naman.
Pero may.
Alright.
Sino?
Joanna.
Tatanong ko sana si Luna kasi kanina pinag-usapan namin yung issue na about the male writer writing about the female experience. So, ikaw ba, I mean, how do you feel? Like you as a female writer, or how do you personally feel about when male writers write about your experience as if they really understood it?
Mr. Pressure Pastor.
Wait na sige daw. Sige, sinabi na lang ako.
Hindi lang, science lang.
Kailangan talaga.
Kasi,
so, husay lang talaga.
Qualified husay.
Kailangan matino. Ibig sabihin ng matino, hindi mo na dinagdagan kung ano yung kalituhan tungkol dun sa kalagayan nila. Hindi ka ng tapak, hindi mo linabusaw yung ewan ko. Pero yung pagkalabusaw din kasi ng representation, it also generates dialogue. At kailangan siyang pasukin kung minsan. Nandun sa writer yung call kung paninindigan niya yung kanyang choices. Kasi, iba, pag ginagamit din nila yung mga lesbians para din sa erotica o para sa... Ayoko yun eh. Mas ang gusto ko pang gamitin paraan pag ipakita yung pagkatao. Not necessarily kung masama, mabuti, black and white na gano'n, kundi sa ipakita yung complexity nila ng mga tao. So yun, husay pa rin talaga at sensitivity.
Tulad sabi ko na kahapon, hindi ko sinasabing hindi pwede isulat ng lalaki ang karanasan ng babae. Hindi talaga yun. Pero yung question kasi na na-raise kanina, sinabi ni Neil, tsaka ni Rona, do you have the right to appropriate it? And the answer really is always, you do not have the right to appropriate anybody else's experience or identity. Kasi yung konsepto para sa akin, yung tindi ko ng appropriation is really, you're really taking it as your own. Which means to say, hindi mo na talaga pinapansin yung right ng iba na to that particular identity or experience. So, ikaw na yon, sarili mo na talaga. And part of it is really panindigan mo. Diba? Kung appropriation yung ginagawa mo, panindigan mo siya talaga. So sa palagay nyo, husay, ang pamantayan ng appropriation, okay, diba? Pero dito sa case ni Ibrahim, na yung risk to write about the male gayness or even the issue of nasaan ang mga Muslim gay writers. Tapos iniisip ko nga, si Teng lang naman ang malitang out, di ba? And so, meron talagang dearth of material doon sa Muslim gay man. So, bakit ang sinusulat niya yung Muslim lesbian or yung Muslim woman? So, nabanggit din ni John na bakit sinusulat yung experience ng babae na pinipilit magpakasal? Samantalang yung mga lalaki, pinipilit din nila yung mga lalaki. May kaibigan kami ni Ralph, di ba? Na bakla siya. At saka actually out siya, di ba? Out siya doon, sa atin. Tapos, kaso, pinilit siya mag-asawa. So therefore, nag-asawa siya. So, and it was huge, Magindanawan, royalty, wedding, bonggang party, very public. But the wife knows he's gay. She accepts him. Kasi pareho silang pinilit lang na gano'n. No? So, I think valid na i-request si Ibrahim na isulat yung mga, yung sa kanya talagang karanasan siguro na bilang lalaking Muslim. Kasi may Muslim women writers tayo na nagsulat na about being forced into arranged marriage. Halimbawa si Arifa Jamil na marami siya has a chapbook of stories about women being, Muslim women, Meronao, Maguindanao women who are forced by their families to do certain things because they're Muslim women. So women from the, what's the title? Women of the lake, something, may chapbook, ubod chapbook siya. So, si Arifa Jamil. Tapos sa amin, graduate ng UP Mindanao. So, si Janessa Lajiman, writing non-fiction about, how she understands her being, her crisis about accepting her religion. And then, sa lesbian, si Diandra Macarambon. So far, ang pagkakaalam ko, isa pa lang, si Diandra. And ito ay proseso talaga. No? So, proseso ng unti-unting pagka-come out. And, so, I think, kung gustong i-express yung experience ng Muslim lesbian, meron tayong gagawa niyan. In fact, yung story ni Diandra na The Right Choice, published in dagmay.com, under her own name. Diba? So, ang tapang niya, princess yan, no? Meron daw princess. Pero, unti-unti na lumalabas na siya bilang Meronao na lesbian. So, I think, hindi marami ang Muslim gay writers. So, may space para doon sa stories nyo. So, pwedeng itanaw itong drafts na ito na practice. Pwede naman practice kasi hindi naman lahat ng sinusulat natin napapublish. Diba? So, pwedeng stage lang siya, parang finger exercises, and as a lesbian, of course, that has layers of meaning, but it's, you just, consider it as practice finger exercises and then write you the stories that you have the right to write, diba? If that's a particular concern. So, yun na lang. And then yung question dun sa the channel for his gayness na mention ni Roland, interesting yun. Pero parang feeling ko na-violate ako kung gagamitin yung pagkababae ko at pagka-lesbiana ko bilang channel sa pagkabakla nyo. Parang, sorry sorry, talagang ano siya. I feel violated.
Thank you
by
for saying
the
that.
idea of this. Sorry.
Thank you.
Sorry, not sorry. Hashtag.
Wait.
Of women. I do feel that somewhat it steps on or takes away the experience of lesbian women or bisexual women in that nawawala yung napupunta yung view, the representation ng experience namin on the gay men and hindi nakikita yung sa amin. So add ko lang din na parang I felt like this is a very man voice, man writing. Yung generational kinship dun sa first story, generational kinship ng mother and ng daughter. I didn't feel the struggling part of the mother regarding din sa experience niya. So, and if that was internalized, it's not clear. Additionally, I want to add, it's a comment from way before kanina. When you write lesbian romance, gay romance, attraction, you don't have to justify it in the text, I agree. But I feel like it's a good defense from the heterosexual gaze if you make sure that the gayness in your writing cannot be taken away from the story. In that, if you take away the gayness, the whole story falls apart.
But you're also at the risk of being essentialist. So parang sinasabi mo na integral siya at inevitable for
in the same way na I feel like the trajectory of my life will not exist if I were a bisexual woman. That's what I